Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to be looking at anaerobic respiration, and I'm going to be referring to the previous videos in this sequence that I've done on cellular respiration. So I am going to refer back to parts 1 to 3 in this. Now in parts 1 to 3 what I looked at was how glucose, an organic compound, can be used to obtain energy in the form of ATP for biological processes to happen. And we said, if we just quickly set the scene, we said that glucose, through glycolysis, gets converted into pyruvate, or specifically 2 lots of pyruvate, that's one thing to note. And then I said with oxygen available, we end up making, if we just keep it very simple, carbon dioxide and water. And I said that happens if oxygen is available. Now, in the case of anaerobic respiration, oxygen isn't. And so the pyruvate would take a very different path. If I just very quickly just insert, here's a little picture of a mitochondria that, and I'll make it a little bit bigger, that I used in part 3 on my videos. This here, where I've said O2 is available, that would happen here, where I've shaded it in blue, or where I've got the number 1 on this diagram. That happens in the matrix of the mitochondria. So aerobic respiration will take place in the predominantly in the matrix of the mitochondria. The first stage takes place in the cytoplasm, and then from pyruvate, the link reaction in Krebs and oxidative phosphorylation are in the matrix. But as I've said, if oxygen is not available, if we start to respire anaerobically, then this pyruvate follows a very different path. It can either, number 1, go to produce ethanol and carbon dioxide. Now I will make a note, because it's quite important to know that that takes place in yeast, and actually in some bacteria. So I'll put that in yeast and in some bacteria. Or that pyruvate could get turned into lactate. And lactate, or that process, happens in humans. And also, I'll put here some bacteria, because that is the case too. So we can get 2 paths without oxygen. When O2 isn't available, that pyruvate either gets turned into ethanol and carbon dioxide, and that happens in yeast and some bacteria, or lactate, and that happens in humans and some bacteria. So when it's not available, that is what we refer to by anaerobic respiration. Now, let's just put this into context. If there is no oxygen, then the electron transport chain comes to a halt. And then we use the electron transport chain to get ATP in the last stage. And I talk about that in part 3. So if the electron transport chain comes to a halt, then NADH, or reduced NAD as it's called, this coenzyme starts to accumulate. Now you need NAD, just NAD, for glycolysis, the first stage of respiration. So the whole process stops. And that's something I think that's really key to mention down here. That if O2, if oxygen is not available, then ultimately NADH can accumulate. We have no supplies of NAD, and glycolysis would therefore stop. Now clearly you cannot have that, because we need to produce ATP to drive metabolic reactions. So in this instance, something very different happens. The pyruvate will accept hydrogen from the NADH. So the NAD is ultimately replenished, and the pyruvate is reduced, because we say reduction is if you gain electrons or gain hydrogen. So the pyruvate Because it's been reduced and it's been chemically altered, it does not enter the link reaction. So we can't get the link reaction, we don't get Krebs cycle, we don't get the electron transport chain in oxidative phosphorylation. So basically, the second part of my first video, part 2 on Krebs and part 3 on the ETC, electron transport chain, none of that happens. So the only energy that you actually get is that you make in glycolysis, which isn't much. In glycolysis, we had to use 2 ATP to phosphorylate ADP. We had to use up 2 ATP, but we ended up making 4. So we got a net gain of 2. And that's all we make. When we go from glucose to pyruvate in glycolysis, we make 2 ATP. And that's all we get through anaerobic respiration. In aerobic respiration, we end up making a total of 32 ATP. So you can see it's quite significantly different. So let's just put the formulae in place just to really summarise essentially what I'm saying here. So in the first instance, so if I look at number 1 at the top where it said ethanol and carbon dioxide, what we have is pyruvate plus NADH, and I said that the pyruvate will accept the H to become reduced. That would ultimately give ethanol and, or I should really put plus ethanol plus carbon dioxide plus NAD, and that's the crucial bit, the NAD. That's what we need. And just for completeness sake, I'll do it with the second example. So in the second example, when we respire, or when humans or some bacteria respire anaerobically, that pyruvate with the NADH will go to form lactate and NAD. And once again, it's the NAD that is key to all of this. Now, in fact, number 1, when we produce ethanol and carbon dioxide, what I'm describing there is really alcoholic fermentation. That's the process I'm describing. So in this video, what we've talked about is anaerobic respiration. And just to summarise, really, again, the reason why we have this. So, the production of lactate or ethanol ultimately allows us to regenerate NAD. This chemical here, this coenzyme here. And this means that glycolysis can continue even when there isn't much oxygen around. So a small amount of ATP can still be produced to keep some biological processes going. Okay, hope all that helps.